Right, what we're going to talk about today is, or what we're not going to talk about today is the benefits of e-learning. You're standing in learning technologies. I'm sure that everybody's very aware of the benefits of e-learning, and there's plenty of cracking companies in here that will be able to talk you through the benefits if that's what your main interest is in. However, what we're going to look at today is how I learned to shape content to improve learning. So what I'm hoping to do today is give you the tools necessary so that you can actually start shaping your own content for yourself. So, right, my name's Chris Sanderson and I'm a creative content specialist with Junction 18. I'm not a sales guy, so I'm not going to stand up here and try and sell you something today. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to sell a little bit about myself first and foremost to give you an idea as to how I got into e-learning as an industry. Now, growing up, my dad actually made e-learning videos. He made e-learning videos for education in colleges. So growing up, I knew that it wasn't just the be-all and end-all to be taught in a classroom. You could actually learn outside of a classroom. But being a bit of a film fan growing up, I had absolutely no interest in the learning potential of educational videos. They were boring and they looked terrible. But it did leave me with one piece of knowledge that I will always remember, and that is, you can have the greatest technical delivery in the world that's available at the time, but see if your content's pure rotten, your learning's going to be just as rotten. So just bear that in mind. So where I kind of started out was, I've been very fortunate to work with a lot of kind of quite prestigious clients in advertising and directing and writing commercials for radio and television. This in turn opened up the door for me to go into film and television, and also publication and communications consultancy. And I think I've done okay for myself. But even with all of the creative avenues that I've actually had, e-learning still had a very little pull for me. But that was until I met the guys at Junction 18. So I've known the guys at Junction 18 since before they started the company. We go back a long way. And I've obviously taken my creative endeavours and went down my path, and the guys, whilst I was doing that, they were creating their own path in e-learning. And they've done a lot of great projects over the years. And every time, obviously we've kept in touch very closely. And over the years they would show me demos and they'd show me projects they were working on, content that they were working with, and every time they would show me something, it got closer and closer to that line where it was what I would want from e-learning as somebody that's interested in content and keeping people entertained and engaged. They were getting a lot closer. That isn't to say that they didn't have like their ups and downs along the way, but like you learn from the errors that you're making, and it doesn't hurt. All it does is ever benefit. But what we've done in the time that I've known everybody at Junction 18, we've put together we've kind of developed our strategy, and we've actually found that it's actually a lot easier to create content than you maybe initially think. So, e-learning is overwhelming. When I started out on my very first e-learning project, I was absolutely overwhelmed. It was, even with somebody that considers themselves a professional writer, I found it really challenging and really tough. But it really isn't as tough as I initially thought. But it is overwhelming, and I can understand why it's overwhelming for everybody here and everybody at Learning Technologies. There are so many traditional types of e-learning. There are so many software solutions for building and publishing e-learning, many of which you'll see here today. Everybody's got their own list of do's and don'ts. There's obviously accessibility options. There's the multitude of technologies and hosting platforms which are ever evolving and constantly changing. And then of course you've got teaching styles as well. Now, I know what it's like being dropped in the deep end and being told, go and make me some of that e-learning. And it's scary, especially when everybody that you look to for advice and help, they want a PO number before they're even willing to give you any sort of help. But what I'm going to do today is I'm going to give you the tools to break it down for yourselves so that you don't have to rely on anybody other than your own ingenuity and just a simple list of things that you can do. And I promise you, by the end of today, I would like to think that you'll see how easy it can actually be. It will save you time. And if you do this, you'll have some great e-learning at the end of it. So I'm just going to quickly run through some of the traditional formats I'm sure you've seen a million and one times. We've got slide-based. which is essentially a very linear platform which is populated with images and text. Then we've got the animated and interactive, which is very much like slide-based, but it starts to include interactive elements such as drag and drop. Then we've got multimedia supported, which we're seeing a lot of growth in the last few years. This is obviously just the same as above, but now we've got audio, now we've got video, now we've got web links. We're reaching out to a broader audience on the World Wide Web. And then of course we've got fully immersive, virtual world or games-based learning. It's an awful lot to consider. Before you've even written your first line of content, you've been asked to think of all of these things. That's actually not really the case. That was my first mistake, was thinking that I had to start thinking in one of these boxes. That's really not where we begin at all. If you get the content right, then it's a case of getting the delivery format becomes secondary. And when you get the content right, it reduces the boundaries and the limitations of those individual formats. And then that opens it up for a whole new array of creative possibilities for yourselves as content creators. I'm just really showing you this just as an indicator of how important that content is to successful e-learning. The fact of the matter is, content is king. The key to great e-learning is to start with great content. I know it's hard to know where to begin with this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down the process and I'm going to show you what I found most valuable when I started out and how easy it will actually become. So if you work to this framework, just remember that if the content's not right, the e-learning never will be right, no matter what you do. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take you through each one of these individually and explain to you what they all do and what they all mean and why you need to know about them. I told you this was going to be simple. Are we nothing doing that, by the way? This is what we're going to look at. I'm just trying to give you an idea of the sort of considerations that e-learning companies take into account when we approach an e-learning task. But as a content creator, we don't need to concern ourselves with those at this stage. So what are we actually left with in terms of our key considerations? We've got target audience, scope, module objective, success criteria, research, key learning objectives and key testing criteria. The list has been reduced substantially. Do you agree? That's good. I'm seeing a bit of nodding. I like a wee bit of interactivity. Right, so we've definitely reduced it. So, and by doing that, we've also reduced the amount of time that we actually have to put in to developing our e-learning content. All of a sudden, it doesn't seem like this monumental task. We've just got to worry about what's right in front of us, and it's just these 7 simple headings. And I swear to you, they're going to become a lot more easy to understand as we go through them. So, let's go into target audience. I can't stress this point enough. Know your target audience. I really don't have to tell you that the best e-learning is shaped around the learner. Everybody here is going to tell you that. If you go to any of these great companies that are here today, I'm sure they'll all tell you the exact same thing. When it comes to the learner and it comes to the content, make sure it's shaped around the learner. If you go into your e-learning module or modules without thinking about your target audience, you're going in with one eye closed. So, what is it I'm looking for when I'm talking about target audience? I'll look at such things as demographics, such as the age, the gender, department that they're in, or roles. I'll look at the technical proficiency of the people that are going to be using this product. I'll look at the available technology as well. So for example, if you're dealing with a large volume of people who are not going to use it on like a tablet, why develop it for a tablet if every single one of them's got a desktop PC? These are just things you need to consider. And then of course we need to think about accessibility for anybody with impairments. The whole point in doing this is that this ensures that you go into the module and get it built around the learner for maximum results. That is to say, we'll get all of the results that we expect and we know is possible from e-learning. So, know your target audience. Okay, next up we've got scope. Scope's a difficult one to actually explain to people, but it's a lot easier to visualise. Basically all we're really saying with this is, how does the e-learning module fit into the overall learning strategy? look at the module that you're working on, look at the e-learning you're working on from the bigger picture. When I'm considering scope, I tend to consider it from a series of questions. So for example, is this one module or is this part of a suite of modules? Is there any overlap in the content of this module with the content of other modules that would allow me to make savings? Does this module stand alone? Will it be used as or revisited as part of a refresher course? If that's the case, do I want people to come back and just do part of the module, or do I need them to go back and do the whole module again? And then we've also got the idea of face-to-face training and accompaniment. Do we need face-to-face training? Do we need some sort of experience-led learning? Would it be worth incorporating a blended learning solution? We're just trying to think about the bigger picture. It might not seem like a high priority scope when we're talking specifically about content, but if you do think about this, this saves you so much time in the long run. This has so many multiple benefits. This allows you to assess the module for a best fit solution. It lets us look for economies of scale savings, and it also lets us identify cost issues early. So instead of a problem arriving during the costly development process where you get things like feature creeping and you incur a lot of cost and it starts to spiral out of control, if you look at it early, we can identify it and we can work with it early. So just bear that in mind. Scope is a really quite important factor. So next up we've got the module objective, and this is where it starts to get fun. This is literally as simple as, what do you want to achieve with this module? That's it. It's literally that simple. That's it. No more, no less. Does anybody here think they couldn't assess their module in their own words like that? Does everybody here think they could do it? Come on, give me a wave. Let me know you're breathing. Thanks for that. So it really is as simple as that. The key here is keep it simple and write it in your own words. Don't write for anybody else as if you're trying to make them understand. Write it in the most clear and concise way, and write it in your own words. When I worked in advertising, first day of advertising, I went into this advertising office and I had this pure cantankerous old boss with like fag-stained hands and stuff, and I'm 17, 18 and I'm like all excited to be there, and he's just like, listen you, if you remember this, don't use 6 words when you can use 3. We'll no paying you by the word. And that was it. That stuck with me forever. So just keep it simple, keep it concise, keep it in your own words. And this will give you a great chance to evaluate the module while establishing the parameters for what lies ahead. So let's maybe look at an example of that. So I've just made up an example of a pretty basic onboarding module, because I think everybody here can probably relate to that. So what do I need from this? What do I need to achieve with this module? I need new employees to acquire the necessary knowledge, skills and behaviours to become an effective company member. That's it. Again, I'm looking at all these faces and I know that every one of you can easily come up with that one line. Piece of cake. So let's plough on. Okay, success criteria. Essentially, success criteria is if the module objective was the question, this is the answer. So what we're saying here is, what would the learner have to achieve for you to consider the learning a success? Now this will vary from business to business, and it will vary from project to project, but the answer will be very specific to what you consider your end goal. So as long as you know what your end goal is, you should be able to define this just as easily. Again, try and keep this as simple as possible. We want this to be as clear and concise so that you're basically building a pathway between you and whoever's going to be developing your project, or you and your overseers with budget or managers or anyone. It's trying to keep that success as clear and identifiable for people as is humanly possible. So taking the previous example and expanding on it, what I'm trying to do is raise awareness of the company best practices, promote early motivation and harness enthusiasm for a culture of success, whilst demonstrating the basic knowledge, skills and behaviours needed to become that effective employee that we were looking for. In doing this, what we're doing is we're setting expectations for ourselves and others, and we're also giving ourselves a clear target to aim towards, and that is very, very important. If you know what your clear target is, and everybody and the people that you're working with know what your clear target is, then there's very little room for mistake and misunderstanding. Again, keep it clear, keep it concise, in your own words is preferable. This is a bit like target audience, to be honest. No matter how prepared you think you are, go out and research the problem. I will warn you, this will take time. This might even be the most time-consuming part of the whole content creation process during that initial phase. And be prepared to think outside the box. A lot of the time, when you're looking at this, you'll be looking at it from a learning objective perspective, and you'll be looking at it from the learning. But as you actually research the problem, you might find that you're actually looking and examining things such as, you're identifying factors such as learner motivation issues, conditions surrounding the learning itself, or even cultural practices within your organisation. Be prepared to think outside the box and think about these things as well as the learning. They're just as valuable. It is time well spent. It might seem that it's a bit daunting, it could seem that it's a bit long, but it's really not. It's really time well spent. Brilliant example of this was someone approached us at Junction 18 about doing a project, and we got really far in the development stage, and it turns out that somebody from a different department in the same company who held a different budget was already commissioning the exact same type of project with somebody else. And it was just a simple case of saying, is anybody else doing this project? Save yourself the embarrassment, put in the time, it's absolutely well worth it. And this will ensure that you're solving the correct problem and not just the perceived ones. This will increase the effectiveness of the end product. Right, this is the part that I probably enjoy the most, and it's the learning objectives. Which specific lessons do you need the learner to know upon completing this module to attain success? Right, this is more a case of how do we go about doing this? What we're essentially saying here is, how do we break down that module objective into a checklist that we can then use to set ourselves some targets? So I'm going to use an example to help explain this one. So, again, using a basic standard kind of onboarding sort of idea to begin with, we can look at this and we can see, right, we need new employees to complete an office tour. It could be virtual, it could be real. We don't actually need to specify that at this point. All we need to know is that tour of the offices needs to be done. We might need them to understand the department hierarchy, including who their line manager is. We need them to know where the online handbook can be found. I'm not going to go through the list, but you can see these are all relatively straightforward checklist things that help you track what efficiencies we're going to try and tick in doing the learning. So the reason for this is, and this is again really important, this will let you, before you've even had to speak to any e-learning companies, any consultants, anybody else, this will let you evaluate the proposed module, and this will let you identify any gaps in the learning, perhaps the size of the module. You might realise that actually this module's kind of sprawling. It might be better to break that down into digestible chunks that's a bit easier for everyone to understand. And also, it will also help you identify areas that maybe once you actually see it written down and you see that checklist written down, maybe you just don't need them to be in this particular module at all. Maybe it's covered somewhere else, like in the online handbook. Dress code, for example. Your dress code might be included in the handbook already, so as long as you know people have read the handbook, you don't have to put in the dress code into the e-learning. So this is just really simple. This is just really a case of putting together a checklist. And again, I really hope everybody's following this and that it seems quite clear. Does everybody seem quite clear on that at this point? Am I making it simple and easy-ish? Am I taking away from any money that might be coming towards my companies? Just don't tell my boss that, right? He's sitting in there. Okay, testing criteria. This just comes down to assessments and do we need them. In learning, you are from time to time going to need, there is a bit of overlap here, sorry. Just to begin, there is a bit of overlap between this and success criteria. Sometimes, especially when we're talking about compliance issue or qualification modules, there is a necessity for testing. We don't always require an assessment, but if we do require assessment, we need to know that we're looking for one and that one's going to come up. We don't necessarily need to go into the details of it at this point. Just knowing that we do need an assessment lets us plan around that and lets us prepare for that. So I'm going to again use that example to kind of help iterate this. So on one side, on the left, we've got the learning objectives, which we've already went through. And in testing criteria on the right-hand side, well, what I've identified from this particular project is, if people have a knowledge of the handbook, I would like to know that they've at least read it or at least looked at it. So I've got that up there for testing, and also understanding the notification procedures. So lateness, illness, scheduling annual leave, things that you might need straight off the bat, and you might need an understanding for employees to know straight off the bat. We're going to test those areas. It is up to you to decide what you consider needing testing or assessment. It's entirely up to you. Again, it comes down to your end goals, it comes down to compliance, what sort of records you want to keep. You don't need to test everything, but it's ultimately, it is up to yourselves to make that decision as to whether or not you need testing. So, this is what we've started with. It's overwhelming. I can understand for anybody here that's dabbled in e-learning or is thinking of dabbling in e-learning, you've probably been hit with this big list. We've stripped it down, as content creators, we've stripped it down. Target audience, scope, objective of the module or modules, success criteria, research, key learning objectives, and key testing criteria. It's a really simple 7 basic headings. Does everybody agree with me on that one? Does this feel like something you reckon you could go away and do yourselves? Good. The content that we've actually put together here, basically what you've created is a framework. You've created a framework for starting your e-learning, for actually getting into development of e-learning. This framework will provide all of the information that an e-learning company or your in-house development team will need to start creating your e-learning module. Everything's here, and I promise you, when you write it down for yourself, it will fill maybe one side of a sheet of A4. That's it. One side of a sheet of A4. That's how big it is, and that's how long it's going to take you. Everybody here is definitely capable of doing that. So, what does this actually mean for us as content creators? Well, as a content creator, you're going to have to do content one way or another. You're going to have to provide content for your e-learning, irrespective. You may as well give yourself the best fighting chance of making that an excellent e-learning module. Now, I'm not saying that the way I've detailed is the only way to do this. There are other ways of doing this. What I'm saying today is, though, this is what I found most helpful back when I started producing e-learning content. This is what I found easy. This is the checklist that we defined as a company, and it really helped us. And it certainly helped me as a content creator. In doing this, you're going to produce effective e-learning. That's because the framework that we've created sets up clear and defined guidelines and parameters for what we expect from the learner, but also from what we expect from our development team or in-house developers, and also from our management structure. We've already set out this clear defined guidelines for them so they can see where we're going, how we're going to get there, and what it's going to do. In doing this, we've also opened up greater creative flexibility. Remember at the beginning when I was talking about all the different traditional e-learning formats that you'd seen? Now you don't have to think about traditional e-learning formats. It's not about trying to shoehorn that idea, that great idea for e-learning that you've got into a traditional format. What you've done is you've opened up a whole creative array of whatever's available. You can look now at your content, you can look at your framework, and you can say, right, what's going to work best for me? What bits can be done in different ways? Maybe I could use a bit of this for that, a bit of something else for this. It doesn't have to be set in stone. You're not shoehorned yourself in, and you're not stuck in that one little rut. Give yourself that full creative flexibility. It'll let you do a lot more ambitious things, I promise you. Also, you've now got I've already touched on it, but the content's going to define your format now, and as I say, that ties in greatly with the creative opportunities that's going to be available to you. In terms of the creative thing, just so I should also mention, it also means that when you're coming up with the creative ideas, because you've got this guideline and you've got this framework, you can sit down with whoever you're involved with in creating this, and you can have creative conversations instead of trying to hammer out what are the key points, what do I need to do, how is this going to look. You can actually start thinking about the creative ideas and the creative concepts that you've got for the project, and then that'll let you work it together to actually come up with something really, really good. Also, it's going to reduce the cost. Looking at it the way we've looked at it, you've not had to shell out any sort of money on an e-learning company. You've not had to hire anybody for consultancy. You've not had to do any back and forth meetings. You've not run up on anybody's time. You've not run up anybody's budget. You've saved yourself some money. And the other benefit of that is you've also identified economies of scale savings. You've identified future savings before you've even approached anybody. So you're going to bring that cost down in both the immediate term, but also in the long term. And this is me kind of talking from like the kind of company line now, but that's great because it lets you reinvest in the e-learning. The more money that you save up front, the more of that money can actually be put up on the screen, and that's what you want. So at this point, though, I would say this is when we'd start to talk to your in-house development team or your learning company. But I hope just to kind of summarise, I hope everybody feels that this isn't quite as daunting as it maybe did like 20 minutes ago. You don't need to be a professional writer. I think you can all see that quite clearly. And you've also figured out how to maximise your budget for what you can get for that budget. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you a little example of what that would look like on screen if you were doing it with Junction 18. So, does everybody feel more prepared for content? Cheers, thanks a lot.